listening to the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
It is the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Dave Ross, Mark Dominik coming at you here as we prepare for week number 18 in the NFL. Mark, you know how this works at this time of the year. We got some playoff teams, obviously all but cemented. We got some other teams playing for nothing but you would assume pride at this point. Other guys may be playing for incentives and or records. And Saquon Barkley, 100 yards away from breaking Eric Dickerson's single-season rushing record. It's official. You and I talked about it earlier in the week on VSiN. He is not going to play in this last game of the regular season against the Giants. Is this the right move? And how do you get there as a GM and or a head coach with the player?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the right move. I mean, you look at this Philadelphia team, they're stuck in the 2 seed, which is not the worst place to be. You want Jalen Hurts to be healthy. You need Saquon Barkley in the postseason. The last thing you want to do is have him jump in. And I think Saquon, I guarantee you, they went to him and asked him about it. And I bet you anything, Saquon Barkley's like, that's not important. You know, I think the huge thing was he got over 2,000 yards. That was the critical part of last Sunday or last week's games to be able to get to that point. And now he can just sit down. He's one of a rare air. Less than 10 guys have ever done that in the history of the National Football League. And even if he got the record, you know, there'd be that asterisk conversation of like, well, you know, but he did it in X amount of games, all that, which is true. But still, yeah, this is he's an ultimate team player. He's an ultimate great guy in the National Football League. He's making the right decision. And I think they went to him and gave him the chance. And I guarantee he set it down. And then the coach can sit there and go, hey, look, we're not going to do this. We're going to let Saquon sit. But I think it was a mutual decision, knowing that Saquon was going to say no, just because of who his personality is and knowing how much he wants to have a chance to get a championship, having spent his career so far at Giants.
You know, I'm with you, Mark, and I feel like this is, if it's ultimately Nick Sirianni's last say, if he did have the final say in it, I feel like this is an adult in the room. Like, he's starting to grow up a little bit, look at the bigger picture, and it's not about, you know, getting it for the linemen and for Saquon. Saquon did say on the record, hey, if they wanted me to go for it, I was cool with that, and it would have been cool to have his name in history. You might never get the chance. Did it change the equation ever so slightly that it would have been against the Giants? Did that factor in at all?
Can you imagine? I mean, just how painful that would be for the Giants fans, for Giants ownership, the Giants decision to watch Saquon drop, because you would think he's going to get 100 yards. I mean, that would be the focus of the game. Saquon said a lot during the regular season when he sat out and didn't need to try to break a single game rushing record or things like that where he had opportunities. He's like, no, let the young guys eat. That said a lot for it. I mean, yes, would it be nice? But in the grand scheme of things, Howie Roseman, the GM, I'm sure Coach Sirianni, they both are like, we can't improve where we are. Let's take a week as if we've got a bye. Since we didn't get a bye, let's use this week as our bye. And let's make sure we're ready for week 1 against the 7th seed. And so I think it's the right decision, albeit it would have been amazing. Against the Giants, I mean, that would have just been, it could be Dayball's last stand, right? It still might be, but it's just one of those things where you're sitting there going, man, I don't know what would have happened. It would have been rough.
Yeah, as the kids say, it would have been chef's kiss right there if he had done it against the Giants to get that record. But still, over 2,000 yards, not too shabby of a consolation prize, that's for sure. Cincinnati, we know they're still fighting to get in. They're going to need a lot of help to do that. Denver's got to lose. Miami's got to lose. They got to beat the Steelers on Saturday night. What was interesting is Joey B talking about his receivers, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, and those guys are both due for big money, potentially in the offseason. And I'm sure you've heard this before as a GM. I wonder if he's sending a message to the front office saying, if I'm paraphrasing here, you cannot let talented guys like a Higgins and Jamar Chase hit the open market. We got to keep those guys in-house. Does that resonate when it comes from your leader in Joe Burrow?
Well, of course it does. This is unique. It's 2 wide receiver ones that are not just wide receiver ones, they're elite wide receiver ones. And, they're both going to command 35-ish money per year. Oh. You've already got 55 in your quarterback. So that means in theory, you've got $125 million in 3 players. And you've got the rest of the team to take care of. It's hard, and it's a bad spot. The Bengals have been notoriously tough to deal with, as you know. That's why Jamar Chase is still playing his deal and T. Higgins still on his deal. There are tags and things you could use to make it more miserable and more difficult for the players. I think they kind of made a decision. I think T. Higgins might hit the free agent market and kind of really have a chance to, go see what he's worth out there. And I think that's a huge, huge deal. And I think that's what's going to happen. I think you have to choose one receiver. I don't know if you can build a team and think about like your left tackle or your defensive end or a young corner or safety or, those kind of spots. I mean, again, the Bengals have usually they lock guys up early only if the deal's really favorable for them. That's why Jesse Bates took forever to get to, and then had to leave to go to Atlanta to get the deal that he wanted. I just don't see the Bengals as a team that's going to sign 2 receivers at market deals. Maybe they will. Maybe they can. I mean, the cap's going to go up. It just doesn't seem like a Bengals type of move. It seems to me like they're going to choose one and let the other go. And that other one that goes, I'm going to put the Patriots first in line and say, hey, well, why don't you go use the number 1 pick on maybe Travis Hunter and sign T. Higgins for Drake May, and suddenly, boom, the AFC East is stacked where the Patriots have been to where they could be. So lots of things we could talk through, but I just don't think that the Bengals are a team that would sign 2 receivers, and yet they're both worthy certainly of getting those kind of contracts.
If you're in the Bengals front office, Mark, and you're the GM, and that conversation we just had, would you have that with Joe? Would you say, hey, look, I don't need to go into roster construction with you. That's my job as the GM. But I want you to be aware of why we cannot pay 2 receivers. Because I think to the layman out there, they go, how can you let these guys go? And I think he just explained perfectly how you can't keep both those guys in the same building.
You have to. So when I was GM, and a lot of clubs do this, you have to look out. So you're not just looking at 2025. You're looking at 26, 27, and 28. How am I building my team? And where's the money going to start to really kind of accelerate? So in certain areas. So could you sign both receivers, Dave? Of course you could, right? Because you can work the contracts against each other a little bit, the signing bonuses, average per years, the guarantees, the way they roll, maybe roster bonus, different things you could do that you're like, okay, I'm not going to have to really bite the bullet till 2026 or 2027 on this deal. And maybe I want to run that out because maybe the cap's gone up, $25 million and suddenly I can do this. It's more of looking at the whole thing and saying, who are the other players that I want to sign? Who are the other players that are going to come out of contract? And when is that going to hit? And who do we want to keep? Who's our core? That's what you got to do. You got to figure out who are the 8 to 10 players that are core, especially once you've signed a quarterback to the number that Joe has. Because again, Joe Burrow's going to be knocking on the door 2 more years from now too, going, hey, I want that $65, $70 million a year contract. And yeah, and so you've got to, you got to prepare for all those different things. And that's what the Bengals, I'm sure, are doing. So if I had this situation, I may not talk to Joe Burrow directly as the GM, but I would talk to Joe's agent and just go like, hey, look, here's the way we're looking at things. We're going to pick one. And certainly I would talk to Joe, and the head coach should, receiver-wise, private confidentially, which guy do you want? What if you had to keep one and you didn't have a choice, there's a coin. Are you flipping it or are you just telling me what side it's going to land on, right? That kind of thing. You could do that. But with the agent, I'm sitting here having a conversation with the agent going, here's the reason why we can't get Joe both guys. Or if we do this, I can't have you knocking. You're going to have to start taking the Tom Brady deals going forward because I can't afford to pay you at the market value. Now, if you want to go there and you're going to say, hey, look, I'm willing to take a little less to make sure we keep the team, yeah, we'll have that conversation in 2 years. But I just need to know this is why it's struggled right now to be able to keep these 2 receivers on this roster. What a great problem to have in Cincinnati. A great draft pick in T. Higgins. Jamar Chase was a pretty easy one to take. T. Higgins was the smart pick, and it's paid wonders. It's a shame. We'll see if they make the postseason or not. They got a lot of work in front of them over the next 72 hours.
It's a fascinating conversation that needs to be had. And also, to your point, it does show good drafting, good position to be in. It shows that we've drafted well, that now these deals are coming up, and we got to pay these guys. That means we hit on those picks, that's for sure. Aaron Rodgers is always going to be a lightning rod, right? And he acknowledged this could be the last game he ever plays this week against Miami if he doesn't come back. As a GM, does Aaron have to sell you again on Aaron if it's not in New York and somewhere else next year that, yeah, I'm still the same guy that's going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer someday?
I think, yes. I got to make sure that the fire is still there. I don't see him on the sideline. I know this game last week was brutal, and on the sideline when he's out, he's sitting on the sideline, and I just want to make sure it still hurts. It's still frustrating. Here's the thing, right? He needs a touchdown pass this week. He's got 499 touchdowns. I mean, there's no way he's not thinking about that nonstop right now going, oh my gosh, what if this is over and I'm going to be stuck at 499? Not that it's going to stop him. Like you said, he's going to the Hall of Fame, all those things. But it would just be one of those, moments that it would just be nice to cap it off. I'm sure he's thinking about that. As Aaron Rodgers playing for me, the club that needs him, whether it's the Titans, the Raiders, whoever it may be, and Maybe they're not in the draft position that they thought they could be in. I would want to sit down and I just need to talk to him. And I know that you've got to wait to see what the Jets do with his contract. You can't tamper or anything like that, but you certainly got to get a sense. Number one, does he want to play? Number two, does he want to play here? And number three, what do I think of Aaron Rodgers? And I want to start doing background research. And so I'm more thinking, let's go talk to people that I know in Green Bay, right? Let's talk to the people that have been around for a long time. Tell me about his character. Guys that have been with Aaron, maybe that had gone, but started their career with Aaron, was still like John Schneider, right? He was still at the Packers when they drafted Aaron Rodgers. Now he's been at the Seahawks forever, but he still knows who Aaron Rodgers was then. Then you talk to some of the guys that are, whether it's Brian Gutekunst, obviously at the Packers, or some of the guys that are within the facility there, or guys that have left. Elliott Wolf, right? He's at the New England Patriots. He's got Drake May. He's not going to sign Aaron Rodgers, but what does Elliott Wolf think of him? So you got to reach out the tentacles of the people around him, and then the coaches. Coach Hackett, that's an easy one for me to call. It's sit there, go, hey Hack, I know you've been around Aaron a lot. What do you think? And so you're doing all that while you're waiting for the Jets to kind of make a move, decide, is it a fit for our organization, and does he still want to play this game?
Yeah, fascinating, because I can't imagine this is it for Aaron, even though he knows that maybe it is. Doesn't feel like it's over, but can he be a mentor? To that point, that very quickly, Jordan Love has nothing but kind things to say, at least publicly, about Aaron, and whether he tutored him, mentored him, whatever. Says he treated him well in that quarterback room. Could Aaron be that? Could he be a bridge guy and say, yeah, I now will educate the young and let him take my job eventually?
Well, I think Aaron, like he said, I'll be a mentor as long as I'm the starter. But if you think Aaron's number two and is going to be a mentor, I don't think that's going to happen. And that's what you got to decide. I think that's where it's unique, where it might not be a club where you draft a first-round quarterback, but because the quarterback doesn't get hit, but you're sitting there at, it could be something random. It could be a reunite in Seattle, right? Geno Smith, maybe it's like, hey, look, I want Aaron for 2 more years, and we're going to do that. Who knows? Or it could be the Rams, and Matt Stafford goes off and wins the Super Bowl and it's like, I'm done. I want to retire. And the Rams are like, shoot, we're picking, 32nd. What are we going to do at quarterback? Let's talk to Aaron. So I think you got to look at those things. I think there's a wide range. So I don't think it's his last game either in the National Football League, because I still think he wants to.
I couldn't agree more, Mark. That's for sure. All right, when we come back, more quarterback news for Week 18, how it might affect what we see, and also the game of the week. What a good one. Minnesota-Detroit. That's next here on the GM Show.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
Back here on the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Dave Ross, along with our GM, Mark Dominik. Mark, we know that some of these changes at quarterback for Week 18 are we're going to rest our guys. Some of them are still injury-related. One of those is in Miami. We got Snoop Huntley. Tyler's going to make his second start. It looks like that Tua Tagovailoa will not be able to go, so they're preparing for Huntley there at quarterback. Jimmy G will get to start. Garoppolo, people. He will get to start in L.A. against the Seahawks. This is a rest move, although the number 3 spot is still in play for the Rams, but Sean McVay is going to rest Matty Stafford, and they're going to play Jimmy G. Anthony Richardson will not be able to go for the Colts, and he says he's got a disc issue with his back. Let's start with these 3 moves here. Which one stands out to the most to you for either the rest or the injury front that we see from Tua and Anthony Richardson?
Yeah, I think it's the injury, right? Tua not being able to go. It's been, a really difficult season for him with the concussions, the injuries. It's the whole reason why it was so hard for the Dolphins, I think, to kind of wrap their head around, like, do we sign him? And that's why I always thought it was going to be a 3-year deal. He gets a 4-year deal. He's played one of those years. But it's still, very frustrating to kind of be in the spot, especially when you need the game to win. If the Dolphins win and Denver finds a way to, lose because of turnovers and just mistakes, and it's not like the Chiefs are just rolling over dead. Carson Wentz wants to prove a point. There's players on the Chiefs that want to prove a point. And so I can't sit there and say that it's a layup, Stockton to Malone, the Chiefs are going to win or Chiefs are going to lose. But I just think that injury's huge, obviously, for the Dolphins. I think it's bigger when you think about the Colts, though, because this is the 5th pick in the draft, and injuries have played a toll at him in college, and they're playing a toll with him in the National Football League. And does Chris Ballard get another opportunity to pick another quarterback? Obviously, we're going to see what Richardson does. I'm sure he's the starter week 1, hopefully in 2025. I would assume that. But I don't know if you can sit there and go, can we bank the whole season on that? Can we trust him to stay healthy? And do we think that Joe Flacco's got another year to be the number 2? Or are we going to come up with something else? So, this is a huge situation in Indy. Again, they're eliminated, sadly, from any kind of postseason contention, but they weren't eliminated from watching Richardson hopefully continue to develop. And that is a huge disappointment in the franchise, and a scary one, quite frankly, because you do see there's a lot of talent around him, certainly from an offensive standpoint, and they've invested a lot in the defensive side, especially the defensive front. So for the Colts, it's a bigger issue because they're still not sure he's the guy. Where Tua, if he's healthy, we all know Tua is the starting quarterback. So I think it's the biggest issue there. I think for Jimmy G, this is kind of like, are you going to be the number 2 in the National Football League? And do you want to extend your career 5-6 more years possibly by being a great number 2? I think this gives him that opportunity to sit there and say, I am that guy. I always thought he kind of turned into that guy, and I still kind of believe. I'll be interested to see what he looks like in this game. But it's a great opportunity for him to prove that, he's the perfect 2. If you've got a young situation or you've got an older situation, you've got to go win 3 out of 4 games. Do you want Jimmy Garoppolo as that guy, or do you think is the love gone? And I think that's what you're going to want to see is where's the passion in this play? What's his demeanor like during the game? What's his demeanor like in the huddle on the sideline? I would send an advanced scout to that game, and kind of take a look at what's Jimmy look like if I'm in the market for that future backup quarterback, to kind of get a sense, not just what happened in the game and you can watch the clicker and you're watching the silent tape, the 22. I want to feel like, what's he feeling like? What's he acting like on the sidelines? Let's go and look at that and send my scout specifically out there because, look, it's a $1,000 trip for a $10 million decision. It's kind of worth sending the scout out there. And usually clubs are pretty good about letting you send a scout at the last week of the regular season, especially if you're not playing anybody. That's where you just call up Les Snead and say, hey, look, I'd like to send a scout out to the game. Are you cool with that? Because you do have to ask for permission. Since you're not playing the opponent, you can't just go in you want. You ask permission for the opponent, and I think that would be something I'd want to do. Those are the little things you got to kind of think about as you're looking at tweaking your roster for 2025.
I didn't know you had to ask. That's pretty wild. You got to, hey, I'm sending somebody out there, Les. You all right with that? We're looking at your backup quarterback. By the way, very quickly, Drake May says if he can go, he wants to go against the Bills. Josh Allen might get, he's going to start to keep that consecutive game streak going. Don't know how long he will continue to go. Josh Dobbs will get the start for San Francisco, that UCL for Brock. The good news is it doesn't look like it's going to be a long-term thing, but Joshua Dobbs will play out the string. And Matt LaFleur is going to play his starters. We don't know how long against the Bears. That was a little bit interesting to me, but Jair Alexander, by the way, is on the shelf for the rest of the year with a knee situation, so that could be a long-term problem there in Green Bay. Let's get to the hat and T-shirt games here. You win, you get one of those hats, you get one of those T-shirts. That's why you play for some of this thing. And we know the big one is Minnesota and Detroit here. Detroit 3-point favorites at home. They played everybody on Monday night. They got the win against San Francisco. It was meaningless, but certainly meant something to Dan Campbell. How do you evaluate this one? Because the extra day of rest, it actually does go to Minnesota. That can be significant this late in the year. Does that have what happened last week in Monday night? Will that have any bearing on Sunday night?
Well, it could. I think you're learning a lot about that during, yesterday, Tuesday and yesterday, kind of looking at your training room going, how many guys are in here? How many guys are just getting the normal rehab, and how many guys are really trying to do a lot of work to get themselves back up on the foot to be able to play week 18 in the National Football League. I mean, it's hard, and it's such a taxing toll on your body. And I was on here. I was against him playing his starters. He played his starters. It's thankfully everything looked like it came through the right way. Still don't agree with the decision, but hey, look, he knows his team. He's got his pulse. He's got to decide what he wants to do. In this game, we know that the Vikings are going to have to win a shootout. That's where Detroit is right now. They're just putting points on the board, and you got to win a shootout. Can Minnesota do that? I don't know. I don't feel like they're a team that's going to win a shootout every time, even though they've certainly had some nice offensive spurts. But Detroit defense is obviously letting people have shootouts as well. They're on the other side of the ball, not really greatly stopping. They've got great safeties. Probably the best tandem safeties in the NFL. I think Kirby Joseph and obviously Brian Branch are elite safeties. And, Kirby Joseph has proved that this year with all the interceptions he's had. And I said at the beginning of the year, if you didn't know who Kirby Joseph was, you haven't watched tape. But I guarantee you scouts that have watched Kirby Joseph going into the season, now, he's not the favorite of everybody. He's a feisty, push fight. The Giants, I think, got in fights with him multiple times in that practice. But that's kind of the mentality of the Lions, right? So, I look at this game, and I think it's an awesome standalone game. I lean towards Detroit by a hair just because I feel like, they are on a mission. I know that they've got a whole plethora of guys on IR. but I just feel like, can they for you at this point? Yes. Do I think Minnesota's defense is strong enough to keep it close? I struggle with that. I saw today that Andrew Van Ginkel made the Pro Bowl, which I think is awesome. What a great signing for the Vikings and the impact he's been able to do on the defensive side. And Brian Flores knew him from in Miami. But I just don't feel like in the regular season, I don't feel like you can stop Detroit. I think the hard thing is going to be in the postseason. Can you stop Detroit? I think when you get down to the Final Four, I think that will be very interesting to see what happens to Detroit. But I have a feeling Detroit walks out with the number 1 seed. And that's hard to say because the Vikings have had such a special season too.
This feels like a punts and turnovers game for me. If you can get turnovers from Goff or Darnold, maybe that flips the equation. But punts, they almost feel like turnovers, right? Like, how many punts do we expect to see? Less than 4 combined? Like, because it does. I wonder. Dan Campbell is going to go for it, whether it's in his own territory. If it's 4th and short, you feel like he's going to play that style of game. Does Kevin O'Connell change his approach and go, I can't punt the football. I got to possess it to keep it out of their offense. Do they switch what they do, or they say, no, we're okay with punting and playing defense? That's what we've done all year.
Yeah, you know what? I think you're right. I think Detroit certainly is going to be more aggressive in that they've been obviously the most aggressive team, I think, in the NFL this year in terms of going for it and trying to push everything and just seeing what happens statistically. And I think they've been more right than wrong, And I know there's been moments where it's like, oh, what's Campbell doing? That's going to be interesting in the fourth quarter to watch Coach Campbell and how he handles the fourth quarter, assuming this game is where I think it is, which is within a 1-score game. I think it's going to be very interesting. I think Kevin O'Connell has to play it by way the game's feeling. I think early on, if you feel like you're going to punt, right, and see where your defense is really lying, if you see that, like, for whatever it's worth, you're starting to get into track meet, then you got to change it up. And I think that's where Kevin O'Connell's going to have to change it up and say, hey, look, if we're going to be in a track meet, then we've got to obviously find a way to score some more points. So I think he's going to be more malleable to the situation of, like, what's going to happen, what should we do, and how should we adjust accordingly, where I think Coach Campbell's going to be the same guy we saw week 1 is going to be the same guy we see week 18 is put my foot down and let's go and let's see if we can outscore these guys. It's a shame that they don't have a healthy team on defense. This team would be really frightening if they had Hutchinson and Lee McNeil right now out there along with Carlton Davis, but they don't, and that's life in the NFL.
And they're 14-2 without those guys, which is amazing to think about, right? That's how historically good this offense has been, right? To help kind of hide some of those warts that the defense certainly does have. I wonder if Minnesota can expose those on Sunday night. Another win, and you win the division game. The Ravens certainly can do that with their massive favorites, 17.5-point favorites against the Browns. And also the Buccaneers are 13.5-point favorites against the Saints. I want to start there very quickly on the Bucs side here. They got new life with that Atlanta loss last Sunday night. And, boy, that one still drives me crazy. I'm sure it's going to drive Falcons fans crazy for a long time, how they let that one get away in regulation without using their timeouts. Do the Buccaneers go, I don't care what Atlanta does now. We're going to go out there and beat the you-know-what out of New Orleans as 13.5-point favorites and make sure we don't have to worry about what Atlanta does against Carolina.
Yeah, I think so. And they run the ball so good between the two running backs they have and catch the ball in the backfield. I mean, Mike Evans is on fire. Baker Mayfield is playing wonderful down the stretch. I mean, everything's coming together for Tampa. I know they had the one hiccup, against your Dallas Cowboys where you're like, what was that? But other than that, this team has been on a mission saying, hey, look, we may be out of it or, we're a little behind, but we're going to find a way to scrap our way through it. I think, this team is playing too well right now. It's hard for me to imagine them going to lay an egg in any capacity, in New Orleans. It's just not the same situation as when I was GM and we were going to play New Orleans and we needed the game at the end of the season. It was Drew Brees out there. It's a little different where you're not having to play Drew Brees. I just don't think Tampa should be denied. To your point, I think the only way Tampa blows this is if they self-implode. Baker throws 2 interceptions. There's a bunch of penalties, maybe a special teams gaffe. I think that's the only way Tampa Bay, and I don't expect that at all. Like, I think everybody walks in this game going, I don't see how Tampa Bay can lose. And I think for the same thing for the Ravens. I really can't put away, any way that the Ravens lose a game they need to win. I don't care about the over, the 17.5. It's, for Harbaugh, win by 1. I don't know any way that's not going to happen. Even if they do gap, I think it's too lopsided in that.
17.5-point favorites in a National Football League game. That's where we are. Super Bowl III all over again, Mark. All right, when we come back, let's talk about more of those seedings in some of these games that have a lot of playoff implications. That's next here on the GM Shuffle.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
We are back. The GM Shuffle continues. Dave Ross and Mark Dominik here, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. And Mark, we mentioned it, the Ravens massive favorites, 17.5-point favorites to beat the Browns, so we think that's going to happen. Then the night game Saturday night, of course, the second game is the Steelers against the Bengals. Now, the Bengals can still get into the postseason with a win against Pittsburgh and then some help in the form of a Miami loss and a Denver loss. So they still need a lot of help, but a lot to play for. How about the Steelers side? They've lost 3 in a row. This would be 4 in a row. And by the way, the Bengals are small favorites to win this game. You don't want to limp into the postseason. You'd like to get that 5 seed. They can wrap that up with a win against Cincinnati. That means they would play Houston instead of theoretically a 3-6 against Baltimore. Are they thinking about all that stuff that we just talked about? Or is it more, man, we need to go out and figure out a way to win a football game again?
Yeah, I think there's two different messages, right? The one that Mike Tomlin's put in front of the team isn't, well, we can go to Houston and we got a better shot of beating them than Baltimore, so let's win the game. This one is Mike Tomlin's in front of the team going, we got to get together, fellas. We got to play Pittsburgh Steelers football, and it starts this weekend against the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, Omar Khan, the GM upstairs, and Mike Tomlin are all looking at it going, boy, we got to get this 5 seed over the 6 seed. What a difference it will make for us to have a chance to do something in the postseason, because you cannot tell me anybody out there right now would sit there and say, look, you get to go to one of the two teams. You can go play the Houston Texans, which I'm not trying to walk over the Houston Texans. They've earned their right to be the South champions. Or you can go see the Baltimore Ravens and possibly the MVP, as well as the running back, and as well as, Zay Flowers, who's a Pro Bowler, right? All these different, it's easy to sit there and go, you would rather go play Houston. I think everybody knows that. I think Pittsburgh's in a really tough spot, though. They're playing, like you said, a Bengals team that's favored in this game, and I can see why. I favor the Bengals in this game as well. I think the Bengals are on fire too much to slow down, to be able to be slowed down by the Pittsburgh Steelers. They got to play the game, though. That's the great thing about this. Obviously, for Cincinnati, they're playing for the postseason as far as they know, right? There's nothing going to happen except for the game against the Steelers that they're going to say, if you win, you're still in. If you lose, you're out. So it's a pretty simple game for them. Pittsburgh's got the ticket. That's why it's so important to play good football. Everybody says, got to play your best football in December. Well, you better play good football in September and October, November to be able to be in a position like Pittsburgh is, where the game's not going your way, but got enough wins stacked. So there's never a great time to play your best or worst football. It's about really the healthier football team through the season, and obviously you've got to play consistently. Pittsburgh's unique. They're in a unique spot where what's going on with George Pickens, losing him for a couple of weeks was really a big blow to this team, specifically offensively, as we all know. And there's been some stuff behind the scenes with George Pickens. It feels like there's some maturity, some growth that he's still got to do, because it doesn't feel like, he's to where Mike Tomlin would expect him to be from a development standpoint. And we know Mike, right? The Chase Claypools of the world, they're just a couple of years ago. It's the Antonio Browns that were many years ago. He's found a way to let go of receivers before the real issues kind of show up, and suddenly their careers don't go in the direction that everybody kind of assumed it would go. And so I feel like we're kind of sitting on the cusp of that with George Pickens a little bit. It's going to be a huge game for him. It's a huge game for these Bengals corners. Opportunities to show that they can shut down a Pickens. I just think it's too much. Absolutely, Pittsburgh wants to win, but I think we're going to see a Pittsburgh Steelers-Ravens rematch in week 1 of the postseason.
It's fascinating, Mark, because you go back to that 3 games and 11-day stretch that Pittsburgh and Kansas City had. Pittsburgh still could have had the 1 seed had they won out. Instead, they lose out. Kansas City wins out, capped by that Christmas Day game at Pittsburgh. And now Kansas City's got that 1 seed sitting at home, and they can rest their guys, get another week rest, and Pittsburgh's got to fight like hell to try to get this 5 seed that you mentioned. Fascinating how those seasons kind of both went in different directions there. The Chargers could still get that 5 seed if the Steelers lose to the Bengals, and they beat the Raiders. But we've seen coaches go about this different ways, right? I'd rather have rest. I'd rather have the better seed. John Harbaugh has basically said, I'm going to play my guys because we have to try to win the AFC North for the Ravens. Jim Harbaugh is like, we're going to try to win this football game. Is that the Harbaugh way, that they really don't care about the seeding? They care about winning the game, and maybe that Dan Campbell philosophy?
Yeah, well, I think for Jim Harbaugh, I think it's much more Dan Campbell-esque. I think he's always kind of been that way. Like, I'm just going to go out there. We're going to fight this thing off. He's that ultimate competitor too. That's what, makes Jim such a good head coach is he finds ways to push buttons and make people really try to push themselves and become the player that, everybody hopes they can be. And so I think again, the Chargers obviously need to stay healthy through this one. Obviously it'd be a huge piece, but I think they want to win this game, and I think they're going to play it. They're going against the Raiders team that has played better, and not like they've been explosive on offense, but they certainly have played better with Aiden O'Connell at quarterback right now than they were, early in the season. Whether there's enough weapons there, enough points there, it doesn't feel like it, but I certainly think that the Raiders kind of, dropped some points on the Chargers last year when Aiden O'Connell was quarterback. You might see the same opportunity here. It's that the Raiders defense just isn't where it used to be. And, when you lose, a defensive MVP like Max Crosby, it's a brutal loss. And I think that's going to be the different piece of the puzzle here is that defensively, I don't know if the Raiders can hold up. But the Chargers, I think, are going to play to win the game. And I get it. They don't want to see any more running back issues. But I think they've got to play to win this game. I think they want that momentum going into the postseason. Hey, look, we started playing better. We got past that that Tampa game where it was just terrible. We played terrible. We had to play all the way back. We're not going to get that feeling anymore. We're going to play really good football all the way through and parlay that into the postseason and see what we can do, because Justin Herbert still doesn't have that first victory either. And I'm sure they want that 5 seed as bad as everybody else does, right? They want to go to Houston. Right. They don't want to go to Baltimore. Who would? And so I think there's going to be a lot of momentum here with the Chargers, and I certainly think Jim's going to play to win the game.
Yeah, don't remind those Charger backers about that collapse in Jacksonville a couple of years ago in the wild card game. Oh, my goodness, that one still haunts you if you're Justin Herbert and company. I'm a little bit surprised by this one in that Sean McVay right now sits in the 3 spot in the NFC. And if they won their game against Seattle, which is now meaningless because they've already wrapped up the West in that regard, they would also wrap up that 3 seed. But if Tampa Bay, who is the 13.5-point favorite to beat New Orleans, beats the Saints, and the Rams lose to Seattle, they slip into the 4 spot. McVay's already said, I'm resting Matty Stafford. I'm assuming that means no Cooper Kupp, no Puka Nacua. He's going to rest some of his big guns, and they've now drifted to 6.5-point underdogs against Seattle. It feels like, Mark, when you go to Jimmy Garoppolo, that you're waving the flag and saying, all right, fine. We'd rather be healthy with our guys, get the week off, gear up for next week against whoever loses between Minnesota and Detroit. Is that the theory there, or is it maybe not a sneaky surrender just yet, and that maybe they are looking at Jimmy Garoppolo and saying, can you lead us to a victory, which does matter because we'd prefer, obviously, to have the 3 seed.
Well, I think it does matter, and I think everybody would prefer to have the 3 seed. I mean, again, if you're the 4 seed, you play the loser of Minnesota-Detroit. That doesn't seem like great, but the NFC is tough, right? Because, if you don't get that one, you're probably playing the Packers, right? And so it's not like that's some easy game either. There's nothing easy about the NFC playoff schedule to me, in terms of who you're going to get to play. Tampa, again, has played well, and I think they'll play well enough to be that at least 4 seed. I think that Sean McVay's been around Jimmy Garoppolo enough to have a lot of confidence in him and say, look, I really think he can do and have a good game. I think it's going to be more interesting in this game to watch and see who is the wide receivers, who does come out there with Jimmy Garoppolo. Is this more to protect Stafford because he's an older quarterback and they're just trying to make sure he's ready for the postseason? I feel like it's more that than saying, hey, let's just, bank a bunch of players. Whatever happens, and hopefully these wide receivers, we can score some points. I think they're kind of more protecting Stafford and not the whole team. I think that's the way McVay will go into this. We'll see. It obviously tell you a lot if Cooper Kupp's inactive or if Puka Nacua is inactive, but I just feel like they feel like they can win and beat Seattle with Jimmy Garoppolo, and I think that's what they've learned all through the season, watching him in practice and how he handles things. And Jimmy's not like he's not been around. He's played Seattle many times. He knows that team. He knows some of the players. He's got a good sense overall, and so in their early catching Seattle with they're kind of feeling sorry for themselves a little bit, like it didn't work out the way they thought it could, and suddenly they got bumped out. So I think this game matters. I think it's more important to see what Rams are actually inactive and who isn't going to play besides the quarterback, because I think they have a lot more confidence in Jimmy Garoppolo than I think we know.
Interesting. How about the Packers? And this is a bit perplexing to me. Yes, the Commanders who are playing Dallas down there, and we know the rivalry scenario there. That's, throw the records out the window, as we like to say. But same thing with the Packers and Bears, right? Packers are massive favorites here to beat Chicago at Lambeau Field, 10-point favorites. And LaFleur said kind of the opposite of Sean McVay And those guys, it's interesting because I was there in D.C. when they were both there under Mike Shanahan back in the day, but different philosophies, right? That LaFleur looks like he's going to play his guys. Now, could this be a temporary thing? Like, I'll play him up for a half? Or is like, man, if you're going to play, you sign up to play 60. How do you think he manages this game that, yes, could affect seeding, but kind of like the Rams, could affect their seeding too, but they'd rather have the rest for a guy like Matthew Stafford versus a guy like Jordan Love?
Yeah, hard one here. I mean, especially coming off the heels of, you said earlier in the show, Jair Alexander going down is a massive blow to this team. And really massive for Jair Alexander, too. The timing and everything like that, just rough across the board. And the Packers are very well aware of that. I think that they want to go into the postseason, and I think they kind of got the mentality of like, we feel like we're good. We can play better. We feel like we're strong, but we can be stronger. And I think that they want to go into this game and win. So I don't think it's like, hey, let's put the guys. I would have the problem here if I'm the general manager, if I'm Brian Gutekunst, and I'm talking to Coach LaFleur. If we're just going to play him for a half,
right?
What's our point? Like, why would we? Like, let's either play the guys or don't. But it's not like it's a preseason game. You're like, okay, you can get one series, and yay, we'll feel good about ourselves. And we're not. There's not a streak, the Josh Allen streak, where you'd like, okay, maybe he goes out for a snap, which is more likely. Imagine Josh Allen going out there for a lot more than one snap. So I think the Packers are playing to win. And I think only in the fourth quarter, if this thing starts to pull away, if it's 30-7 or 30-10, yeah, then you start banking guys as fast as you can on the defensive side and offensive side. But I think that they're just trying to get that consistency so they can walk into week one and say, hey, look, we're ready to play whoever it would be, whether that's, obviously the 2 seed, 3 seed, whatever it might be. That's what they're ready to do.
Very quickly, for the Commanders side here down in Dallas, 4.5-point favorites against the Cowboys. They got to feel great about themselves, punch the ticket with the win against Atlanta. Again, you could flip-flop with Green Bay, but would you consider Jaden Daniels at somebody? It looks like he's going to play, but like, would you consider if the same type of scenario, whether you're getting beat or you're way ahead of pulling these guys out and getting ready for that wild card round?
Yeah, I think it's that way, Dave. I mean, I think it's that where if you're winning by a lot or you feel like the game's really swayed in the wrong direction for you, but you don't want to, if Jaden Daniels throws 2 interceptions, no touchdowns, I'm keeping Jaden Daniels out there. I want a little bit of momentum going into the postseason, not, oh, wow, everything's going wrong and he has to live with that for a week and start to self-doubt or anything. So I think they'll both just kind of play to win the game. And only if it goes extreme one way or the other will you see them start to pull people out.
Fascinating. This is what Week 18 with playoff implications for the following week looks like. When we come back, Mark, how about some player incentives? That's next here on the GM Shuffle.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
We are back on the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Dave Ross alongside our GM, Mark Dominik. Who better to ask these questions to than you, Mark? Because Geno Smith and the Seahawks have nothing to play for. They cannot win the division. We all know that. The Rams have already locked it up. Geno Smith, though, has a lot to play for in the way of incentives. So how about this? He needs 186 yards passing to earn a $2 million bonus. Also gets $2 more million, Mark, if Seattle wins and gets to that 10-win threshold. Those are in Geno's contracts. Now, you're the GM. You guys had those conversations when you put those in the deal. You can't sit the guy now, right? Because then it goes, well, why'd we put that in the deal if you're not going to let me try to get that? How does that work with the front office and with the player, even though technically this is a meaningless game?
Yeah, you're in a situation where you obviously don't want him to hit it. I mean, it's $4 million of cap space that you would like to put somewhere else, but you cannot sit Geno Smith or limit the ability to get these bonuses, because that is a trickle down throughout the entire building. It travels into free agency. They're the team that helped stymie Geno Smith from getting money. I don't think you can do that. I think one thing you learned is, maybe it's 11 wins and not 10, because I've been at 10-6 and didn't get to the postseason. That's not a great feeling. I'm sure John Schneider thought, if you get to 10 wins, you probably get in the postseason, but it's 11 now. It's going to be the number that you're going to have to write in those contracts. But it is what it is. I think you play them. You just put it out there and you realize that, hey, look, if we're going to eat up $4 million in cap, we're going to eat it up, but we're going to do the right thing here for the rest of the team and for everybody to see that in Seattle, we do things right by the players. And I think it's a pretty easy conversation. But I think internally, win or lose. Do you want to have a winning season? Yes. Do you want to have 10 wins? Yeah, John Schneider wouldn't want to have 10 wins, right? Everybody wants to, have a nice. Coach McDonald wants to have a first 10-win season, be 10-6 instead of 9-8. Sounds different, looks different. Even Coach Dungy used to talk about that back in the day. We used to play, towards the end of the season. This was 98, 99, 2000. We'd get to, 9-7, and we'd sit starter. We'd be 9-6 and sit starters. And I understood that, but even all of us were like, boy, 10-6 just seems so different than 9-7. It just seems like a world away when you got double digits. And yet it meant the same thing, right? Whether we were 10-6 or 9-7, it's still the same outcome. We were in the postseason, we're playing on the road or whatever it was. I see the same thing here, though. 10 wins, to me, it's if I've got to pay $4 more million to Geno Smith to get to 10-7 for Coach McDonald's first year, it's money well spent.
For the Buccaneers, this is a trickier one because on paper, you go, well, it's easy because you got this incentive for Baker Mayfield, which I never knew this would be in a language of contract. But he needs to finish in the top 10 in yards per attempt to earn an extra $500,000 bonus. He currently ranks 7th going into this last week. Mike Evans, conversely, needs 5 catches and 85 yards to earn $3 million bonus. Now, he only had 2 catches the last time. Marshawn Lattimore was the corner then. He's no longer there. He's now in D.C. So you could say, well, this is easy. Baker's got to throw it to Mike. Everybody's happy. But you need the win to win the division. And maybe the easier path to get there is through the running game. Would you force feed something to hit the bonuses, but it could be at the detriment of the team, right? Like we can't have it. You got to win the game. You got to win the division still to get in the postseason. How do you juxtapose those two things?
Yeah, I think you put in your shots. I think you've got to call your shots for Mike Evans. This is without Chris Godwin this year. Imagine what, Baker's night might be if you had a healthy Chris too. Mike, when you're talking about one-on-one matchups and you're saying high point the ball, Evans is tough to beat. He's been like that for a decade now. Like, it's amazing. He's been a robot. Every year, basically 1,000 yards. Hopefully again this year, that he's, continues to, blow up and take that into the postseason. I think you call your shots. And I think you certainly design 4 or 5 of those in the game, especially again with the Saints defense. It's not the same, right? And, whether it's Lattimore or not, I know those two have always had great battles. I think that because of where they are corner-wise in the Saints, I think I feel pretty good about 50-50 balls. And I'm not concerned. And I also got to look at the pace of the game and where things sit. And where am I throwing them at, right? Am I throwing them down to the 10-yard line, or am I throwing them from my 10 backed up throwing to the 50? Like, that's not where I take my shots where if it is a pick because I took a shot at it, maybe they got the ball at their own 20. No big deal. I just don't want them to have the ball at their own 45. I think that's where you got to kind of decide when are you going to take those shots down the field to Mike to make sure. But you're going to get him his catches. That's going to be an easy one, right? You could throw screens and little hitches and things like that where you're going to make sure Mike gets his catches. And I think with Baker, where he sits on yards per attempt, the running backs have done a really good job of using screens or getting out in space and actually getting 7, 8, 9 yards per carry or per catch. And so I think you kind of keep the same game plan, but Mike will get his catches for sure, and I think he'll get. I think they'll both win to put their bonuses.
That's fascinating. You get the 5 catches, the 85 yards. Baker gets in the top 10. Everybody gets paid, and they get potentially the 3 seed if the Rams lose to the Seahawks. Could be a really big day financially and going forward in the playoff picture for the Bucs. As a GM, this is always fascinating to me. We've had these discussions. Nobody tanks. You don't want to lose, right? But this might be the one week that it's advantageous potentially to lose to get the number 1 pick in the April draft. Hard thing to juxtapose here. Patriots now sit in that catbird seat, if you will. If they lose to Buffalo, they get the number 1 pick. Drake May, who's dinged up a little bit, says, if I'm healthy, I'm playing. Gerard Mayo is a first-year head coach. Mark, as the GM, how do we navigate that? Are we trying to win this game against Buffalo if you're New England?
Yeah, I think you are. And yes, I know the number 1 pick's up, and Drake May should play. If he's healthy to go, you put him out there no matter what, right? I think you just got to build the quarterback to that mindset, and I don't think it takes a lot of building than Drake May to think that way. So I don't think he's fragile or worried about, do I get the number 1 pick and what player are we going to get? I think when you're at the top of the board, you're in pretty good shape, where the Patriots, and they have enough needs across the board. Would it be great for them to have the number 1 pick and possibly Travis Hunter? Sure, that would be fantastic for them. But does it mean that you would sacrifice a game? That's not in Mayo's repertoire, I don't think. Certainly Elliott Wolf, who's, kind of working alongside. I think they want to just build consistency. Here's the problem. I just don't think the Patriots are good enough. I don't think the Patriots are good enough to score enough points, even against the Bills team that's going to sit Terrell Bernard, and certainly Josh Allen's going to pop out. And which guys aren't going to play for, Von Miller's, certainly not going to be out there. I don't want to, but I still don't know if they're better than the Patriots or worse than the Patriots when they take Christian Benford off the field as a starting corner and say, hey, look, we're going to play our backup just to make sure he's healthy because he's been that kind of your DB one. And so I look at this team and say, I still think Buffalo's better. Dalton Kincaid sits, Dawson Knox still plays, right? So it's just like, it's not like they're just a bad team. I think that the Bills still have weapons, and Mitchell Trubisky, what he can do and what's going to happen, it's all kind of up for debate. So, yes, you go full throttle. I think if you're the Patriots, I still don't think it gets it done against the Buffalo Bills backups.
So that would, if they're not good enough to get it done, that would clinch the number one spot. The Titans can get in there with a loss against Houston and that Patriots win against Buffalo. Boy, if you're Brian Callahan, right, and you got your dad Bill there that is helping you out with the offensive line, this has not gone the way you want it to go in year one. Your 1-point underdogs against Houston. They are going to play some of their starters, by the way, for the Texans. For the Titans, is this one last shot for Callahan's plural to say, no, we're going to turn this thing around and start to the Week 18 victory?
Well, I mean, they obviously want to get a victory. I don't think Callahan's one and done. I don't have any concern about that whatsoever. I think the bigger scare might be Rand Carthon. The GM might be in more trouble based off of the quarterback. He was part of the Will Levis decision-making team, and Will has not played well at all. He's been a complete roller coaster. There's been moments where you're like, okay, there's Will Levis. There's too many of the dips and the valleys that we see with the turnovers, and not just interceptions, but fumbles. And it's not an athletic thing. It's just a mental thing with Will Levis where you're just like, come on, man. Like, let's get to be more consistent. Let's make the big decision. Let's dump the ball. Let's take the sack and hold the football tight instead of worrying about like trying to make some crazy play or make some crazy throw. And I think he's pushing and pressing so hard that he continues to make those mistakes. I don't think the Titans are good enough to win right. I think they've got still some special players in this football team in Nashville. Obviously, up front on the defensive line, there's some elite type of players and Jeffrey Simmons, et cetera. But I just don't think that they're good enough to beat the Texans. And I think this is an overhaul. I think you're going to see a completely different offense in 2025 under Callahan with the quarterback that he wants. And so, could they end up with the number one pick? Absolutely. I don't think they'll beat the Texans. I think they'll be number 2, number 3. It'll make for a much more interesting draft if the Patriots can hold on to pick one who aren't going to take a quarterback and everybody else who might want to take a quarterback, whether that's going to make for a move or for a good drama, we'll wait and see. But I think that the Titans certainly will be in the top 2, top 3 picks because I just don't think they win this weekend.
The Browns are 17.5-point favorite, dogs rather, against the Ravens. So we don't assume they're going to win that game. So they can try as hard as they want to still win it and save face that way without having to tank. They would get the one spot if they did lose to Baltimore and they get wins from the Patriots and the Titans. The Giants are the interesting one here because they were in the pole position to get the one spot. Then they beat the Colts last week. So you know how New York fans are going to take that mark. What are we doing? Even when we win, we lose, right? That's what they're thinking today. They could still get it if they could lose to Philadelphia and they get wins by the Patriots, Titans, and Browns. What about that rationale for the Giants? That even in victory, you screwed up our positioning for the draft here. And boy, do the Giants need every high pick they can get.
Yeah, and I think they walk out with a win this week. Even though Philly's going to bank a bunch of the good players, right? This is not going to be the same Phillies team. And I think the Giants are starting to show a little bit with last week that there's at least some hope and some, ability. And, you got to remember, Coach Dayball, I think, is coaching for his job possibly. You've heard the big story coming out, package deal. They're not a package deal. That's a scary statement if you're Coach Dayball, right? Because you're like, wait a second, am I in trouble here? So I think he wants to come out with a bang. I think everybody on that staff does. And then you challenge the players. You're sitting there going, hey, look, you're on tape this week to decide who you're going to be to 31 other clubs. How are you going to respond to when the game doesn't matter? Everybody's going to look at that game and say, what did he play in that final week when he thought the season was over? What kind of mentality does this player have? And I think you use that as your mantra to say, let's go beat the Eagles and let's win another game. And it'll be funny. Giants fans are going to be like, of course, we win the last 2 games of the regular season. Now we're picking 6, 7, 8 when we had a chance at number 1 2 weeks ago. Of course. But, I think the Giants, I think they'll put up a better fight than to be expected this week and certainly lower their draft stock, I'm afraid.
They drafted at 5 last year. They got Neighbors at 5. So, I think you could also look at it that way and say, hey, it's really not necessarily where you're picking, but it's who you pick and make sure you maximize that pick. And they did okay at 5. So Giant fans, you can relax if you win this one too. Mark, great insight as always, my friend. Always appreciate it. We'll catch up again Monday, right, for GM Shuffle?
Yes, sir. Let's do it. I look forward to it. Enjoy the games, man. We'll be talking about playoffs next week.
I can't believe it. Playoff edition of GM Shuffle. We'll see you on Monday.